In the concrete heart of Western Sydney, one name carried more weight than a lead pipe: Michael Davey. To the streets, he was the Prince of Penrith. To the law, he was a high-ranking enforcer for the Rebels Motorcycle Club. To his crew, he was an untouchable titan. But in the early hours of March 30th, 2016, the crown didn't just slip, it was shattered. A hail of gunfire outside a quiet Kingswood home ended the reign of the prince, leaving behind a mystery that would shake the foundations of Australia's largest outlaw empire. Because the most terrifying thing about Michael Davey's death wasn't that he was killed. It was who pulled the trigger. Two worlds, one man. Michael Davey wasn't your average bikie. He was a man of jarring contradictions. On one side, he was the battle-hardened veteran of the Rebels MC, a man whose reputation was forged in the fires of Sydney's underworld. In a town like Penrith, where respect is the only currency that matters, Michael was a millionaire. He commanded the room with a silent, predatory presence. He wasn't just part of the gang, he was the hierarchy. Yet, behind the leather vest and the tattoos, there was a ghost in the machine. To his inner circle, Michael was a devoted father, a man who would drop everything to be there for his son. He lived in the narrow, dangerous gap between being a lethal outlaw and a family man. This duality made him fascinating, but in the world of 1%er clubs, having a softer side can be a target on your back. He thought he could balance both worlds. He was wrong. The cost of the crown. The Rebels MC isn't a social club. It's a high-stakes machine fueled by drugs, extortion, and absolute, blind loyalty. As Davey climbed the ranks, he stepped into a world where the air gets thinner and the knives get longer. In the outlaw world, there is no such thing as a steady position. Every day is a struggle to hold your ground against rivals on the outside and ambitious brothers on the inside. Davey was a master of control, but you can't control what you can't see coming. He had survived the street wars and outrun the law, but a new threat was simmering. A threat born of shifting allegiances and the toxic paranoia that defines gang life. The question wasn't if someone was coming for his spot, it was how far they were willing to go to take it. Midnight in Kingswood. Just after midnight, the silence of the Kingswood suburbs was ripped apart. Multiple gunshots echoed off the pavement. When the smoke cleared, the Prince of Penrith was lying in his own driveway, his life bleeding out into the Australian dirt. It was a professional execution. No hesitation. No wasted bullets. When the police arrived, they found a crime scene that looked like a statement. This wasn't a random mugging or a drive-by gone wrong. This was surgical. At first, the detectives looked at the usual suspects, the Hells Angels, the Mongols, the blood rivals who had been trading blows with the rebels for decades. A high-profile kill like Davey could spark a citywide war. But as the shell casings were collected and the witnesses began to whisper, the narrative shifted. This hit was too clean, too personal. It didn't smell like a turf war. The ultimate betrayal? The police hit a brick wall of silence. In the world of bikies, talking to the boys in blue is a death sentence. But even through the silence, a chilling theory began to take shape. The investigation wasn't looking at rival colors anymore. They were looking at the very men Michael called brothers. Why would the rebels want their own prince dead? Was it a power struggle? An unpaid debt? Or did Michael Davey know something that made him a liability to the club he had spent his life building? The Prince of Penrith was dead, and the killers might have been wearing the same patch he died for. But the truth was buried deep within a code of silence that no one, not even the police, seemed able to break. One thing was becoming dangerously clear. Michael Davey hadn't just made waves, he had triggered a tsunami. And in the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, when you're at the top, the water is always freezing. Rumors began to ripple through the Western Sydney underworld. This wasn't just a guy who liked the roar of a V-twin engine. This was a man who sat at the high table of the rebels' MC. He held the keys to the kingdom, power, influence, and a deep knowledge of the club's inner mechanics. But that kind of leverage is a double-edged sword. To some, Michael was a leader. To others, he was a massive walking liability. The political execution. Detectives soon realized they weren't looking at a street brawl gone wrong. This wasn't a wrong place, wrong time scenario. This was a political hit. This was an assassination orchestrated from the shadows of the club's own hierarchy. But even as this theory took hold, the investigators hit a wall of stone. The rebels remained true to their name, refusing to utter a single word to the authorities. In a world where omerta isn't just a suggestion but a survival tactic, no one was ready to point a finger at a brother. The question haunted the precinct. Who wanted the prince dead enough to break the brotherhood? Was it a power play for his throne, or had Michael simply seen too much? Inside Strike Force Glenorrhy. When the Prince of Penrith fell, the police knew they couldn't treat this like a standard homicide. They launched Strike Force Glenorrhy, a specialized team of elite detectives with one mission: find the shooters who silenced Michael Davey. They followed the standard playbook: door-knocking, forensic sweeps, and witness interviews. But they quickly ran into the bikie code. In the underworld, the only thing worse than a murderer is a dog, an informant. The rebels weren't about to hand over the keys to their internal justice system. So, the detectives had to go back to the beginning. They began deconstructing Michael's life, brick by brick. They looked at his meteoric rise within the rebels, his business dealings, and his secret fractures. They found a man who had meticulously carved out a kingdom in a landscape of betrayal. But the higher the throne, the more people there are waiting for you to trip. The fracture within. As Strike Force Glenorrhy peeled back the layers, they didn't just find gang rivalry, they found rot. Whispers began to surface of a civil war brewing behind the clubhouse doors. These weren't just petty disagreements over territory or bike parts. These were deep-seated, violent fractures in the foundation of the rebels' MC. The investigation shifted its lens. They stopped looking at rival patches and started looking at the men standing right next to Michael in his last club photos. The motive: who gained the most from his absence? The means: who had the access to catch a man like Davey off guard? The opportunity: who knew exactly where he would be at midnight in Kingswood? But there was a problem. A big one. The killers hadn't just been cold, they'd been surgical. No fingerprints on the shell casings. No DNA left at the scene. No CCTV footage in a neighborhood that seemed to go dark at exactly the wrong moment. It was the perfect hit. Swift, silent, and impossible to trace. It was the kind of job that required professional planning, the kind of planning usually reserved for the highest echelons of organized crime. The police were staring into a void. They had a victim, they had a theory, and they had a mountain of silence. But just as the trail seemed to be going cold, a single thread began to unravel. A thread that suggested Michael Davey's death wasn't the end of the story, but the opening shot of a much larger war. The ghost of a hit. What did the police find in Michael's private history that changed everything? And who was the mysterious figure seen leaving Kingswood minutes after the shots rang out? The truth was coming, but it would be written in blood. Detectives had a gut feeling that would keep them awake for months. The key to unlocking Michael Davey's execution wasn't hidden in some rival clubhouse across town. It was buried deep inside the rebels' MC itself. If they could just crack that infamous wall of silence, the truth would come pouring out. But this wasn't just another body on the pavement. This was the opening chapter of a much darker saga. The organization, beyond the leather. To understand why Michael had to die, you have to understand the machine he served. The Rebels Motorcycle Club wasn't just a pack of guys who liked loud engines and open roads. They were a sophisticated, well-oiled criminal enterprise with tentacles reaching into every corner of the Australian underworld. In this world, power isn't given, it's taken. Loyalty is the currency, but fear is the enforcer. For the Prince of Penrith, rising through the ranks meant more than just earning a patch. It meant becoming a target. In the rebels, there is a simple, brutal truth. Trust has an expiration date, and loyalty is only as strong as the next power play. The generational war. As Michael climbed higher, the air became toxic. An invisible civil war was brewing within the clubhouse walls. On one side, you had the old guard, the veterans who had built the club from the dirt and saw themselves as the rightful kings. On the other, the young, hungry, new blood, ambitious players who viewed the elders as relics standing in the way of progress. Michael Davey was caught in the crossfire of this generational friction. He was respected, yes, but in the eyes of his peers, respected is often just another word for dangerous. The internal politics of the rebels were more cutthroat than any corporate boardroom, and it became chillingly clear that Michael's death was a calculated move in a high-stakes game of chess. The most dangerous weapon in Sydney that night wasn't held by an enemy. It was held by a brother, cracking the fortress of silence. As Strike Force Glen Ori pushed forward, they realized they weren't just fighting criminals, they were fighting a culture. Law enforcement had nothing. No shell casings left behind, no smoking gun, and a neighborhood full of witnesses who suddenly developed amnesia. In a world where being a dog is a fate worse than death, the rebels had built a fortress of silence that seemed impenetrable. But the police had one advantage: time. They stopped looking for a killer and started looking for a motive. They began dissecting Michael's inner circle, the men he rode with, drank with, and trusted with his life. Who stood to gain the most when the prince fell? Who was tired of standing in his shadow? The target on his back. The deeper the detectives dug, the more the loyal brotherhood facade began to crumble. They uncovered stories of jagged rifts and whispered mutinies. Members who once stood shoulder to shoulder were now looking at each other through the sights of a gun, all jostling for a bigger slice of the criminal pie. Michael, with his skyrocketing influence and prince status, had unknowingly walked into a trap of his own making. His power hadn't just made him a leader, it had made him a liability. The investigators found a trail of resentment that stretched back years. There were men within the club who didn't just want his position, they hated his guts. The prince was dead, the throne was empty, and the rebels were closing ranks. But as the police began to squeeze the club's top earners, the first cracks in the brotherhood began to show. The detectives of Strike Force Glen Ori knew they weren't just hunting a gunman, they were hunting a ghost within the machine. The men who stood closest to Michael, the ones who likely shook his hand just hours before his execution, were the same ones ensuring the truth stayed buried behind a fortress of silence. This wasn't a standard hitman's job. This was a Judas contract. It was the kind of cold-blooded backstabbing that only occurs when the bond of brotherhood is stretched to its absolute breaking point. But while the rebels thought their code was impenetrable, they forgot one thing. In a world built on greed, silence eventually has a price. The wall cracks, August 2018. For 2 long years, the investigation simmered in frustration. No smoking gun, no DNA, just the deafening silence of the Western Sydney underworld. But in August 2018, the static finally broke. The police made their move, and the resulting shockwaves leveled the bikie community. They didn't arrest rival gang members. They arrested family. The first man taken into custody was Jason "Plumber" Palmer, a former high-ranking heavy within the rebels. The second? David "Stitch" Rumble, another ex-member who had once been part of Michael's inner circle. These weren't just associates. These were men who knew Michael's secrets, his schedule, and his vulnerabilities. For the authorities, this was the ultimate "I told you so." It validated the chilling theory that had driven the case from day one. Michael Davey hadn't been killed by an enemy. He had been sacrificed by his own. A house divided. The arrests pulled back the curtain on a terrifying reality. The Rebels Motorcycle Club, once seen as an untouchable, unified empire, was rotting from the inside out. The image of the unbreakable brotherhood was a lie. In its place was a collection of fractured factions. Game of Thrones, played out on Harley-Davidsons and fueled by meth and extortion. As the trial approached, the motive began to crystallize. This wasn't just a petty grudge. This was underworld politics at its most lethal. The conflict, Michael had been more than just a member, he was a power broker. The sin? He had stepped on sensitive toes, the kind of toes that belong to men who don't negotiate. The result? In a world where ego and influence are the only metrics of survival, Michael's ambition had become his death warrant. The investigation shifted from a whodunit to a why did they do it? Why did two men who once wore the same patch feel the only way forward was to erase Michael Davey from the earth? The aftermath of a hit. You might think that the handcuffs clicking shut on Palmer and Rumble brought peace to the streets of Kingswood. But for the rebels, the nightmare was just beginning. The murder of the Prince of Penrith didn't stabilize the club, it shattered it. The power struggles that had been whispering in the shadows were now screaming in the streets. The club was no longer a feared, singular force. It was a house divided against itself. Suspicion became the new loyalty. Every member looked at his brother and wondered if he was the next Stitch or the next Plumber. Michael Davey's death wasn't just another statistic in a bikie war. It was the moment the public realized that the greatest threat to a rebel wasn't the police, and it wasn't a rival gang. It was the man riding right next to him. The prince was gone, and the kingdom he helped build was burning. But as the smoke cleared, one chilling question remained. Michael was dead, and his killers were behind bars. So why were the streets of Western Sydney more dangerous than ever? The handcuffs on Jason, Plummer, Palmer, and David, Stitch, Rumble weren't just the end of a manhunt. They were the beginning of a relentless police siege. With the Prince of Penrith dead and two high-ranking heavyweights behind bars, Strike Force Glenorrhea saw blood in the water. The authorities didn't just want the shooters, they wanted the entire architecture of the rebels' MC. They knew that Michael's execution wasn't a one-off tragedy, it was a symptom of a terminal illness rotting the club from the inside. But as the detectives tightened the noose, a new question emerged. Who else was hiding a smoking gun? The human cost behind the patch. While the headlines screamed about bikie wars and underworld hits, the reality in the quiet suburbs of Western Sydney was far more somber. Beyond the leather vest and the criminal rap sheet, Michael Davey left behind a family. He was a father. He was a son. He was a man who had built a life on a foundation of grit, only to have that foundation swallowed by the very world he helped create. His death left a void that no courtroom verdict could ever fill. But in the cold, hard logic of the rebels, grief is a luxury they couldn't afford. In their world, you don't mourn the fallen, you wonder who's falling next. Michael's end was a brutal reminder. In the rebels, your life is only as valuable as your last play. A feast for the vultures. As the trial of Palmer and Rumble commenced, the rebels' enemies were watching from the tall grass. For decades, the rebels had been the apex predators of the Australian pavement, but now, they were wounded. The prince's death had set off a catastrophic chain reaction. Rival clubs like the Hells Angels, the Comancheros, and the Mongols, who had long been kept at bay by the rebels' unified front, began to smell opportunity. Territory that was once untouchable was now up for grabs. The rebels weren't just fighting the law anymore, they were fighting for their very existence. The trial, pulling back the veil. When the legal battle finally moved into the courtroom, the public got a front-row seat to the collapse of an empire. This wasn't just a murder trial, it was an autopsy of a criminal organization. The prosecution's case laid bare the truth. The rebels were no longer a brotherhood. They were a collection of warring tribes, fueled by paranoia and unchecked ambition. Michael Davey had stepped into the middle of this fractured landscape, and he had paid the ultimate price for his influence. The evidence presented didn't just point to two men with a grudge, it exposed a culture of internal instability that had been brewing for years. Michael hadn't just been killed, he had been cleared out to make room for a new, more ruthless order. The final nail in the coffin? By the time the judge handed down the convictions for Palmer and Rumble, the damage was irreversible. The unified force of the rebels' MC was a ghost of the past. The trial had acted as a mirror, showing the gang exactly how far they had fallen, from the kings of the street to a fractured group struggling to hold onto their own clubhouses. Michael Davey's death marked the end of an era. It was the moment the myth of the untouchable outlaw died in a driveway in Kingswood. Both killers are now behind bars, and the prince lies in a grave. But the war Michael started in his final moments isn't over. In fact, some say the real battle for Sydney's soul is only just beginning. The gavel fell, the cell doors slammed shut, and for the public, the case of Michael Davey was closed. But in the dark alleys and neon-lit strips of Western Sydney, the real fallout was only just beginning. The conviction of Palmer and Rumble wasn't a resolution, it was a signal to every shark in the ocean that the great white of the bikie world, the Rebels MC, was bleeding out. For decades, the Rebels' territory was a fortress. Now it was a target. Rival gangs who had spent years watching from the sidelines, waiting for a single crack in the armor, finally saw their opening. The Prince of Penrith was gone, and with him, the stability that kept the peace. The vultures descend. With the Rebels' leadership in shambles and their reputation for absolute unity exposed as a myth, the map of Sydney began to change overnight. Territory is the lifeblood of any outlaw organization, and the Rebels were losing their grip. Rival clubs didn't just move in, they carved out chunks of influence with surgical precision. The internal rot that led to Michael's murder had stripped the club of its ability to strike back. Every arrest and every courtroom revelation acted as a recruitment poster for their enemies. The once mighty Rebels were no longer the hunters, they had become the hunted. Justice versus peace. In the hallowed halls of the court, the legal system claimed victory. But for those who shared Michael's blood, justice felt like a hollow prize. To his family, he wasn't a headline or a high-ranking member, he was a father whose seat at the table would forever be empty. While the trial provided a sense of closure, it couldn't erase the trail of unresolved tension Michael left in his wake. His life was a masterclass in the bikie paradox, a world built on the promise of brotherhood that almost inevitably ends in the reality of betrayal. He was a man of immense power who, in the end, was powerless against the very system he helped uphold. The death of a dynasty? The story of Michael Davey serves as a chilling case study for the underworld. It is a stark reminder that in a world where loyalty is tested by the minute, betrayal isn't a possibility, it's an eventuality. As the dust settles on the Kingswood execution, the Rebels Motorcycle Club stands at a terrifying crossroads. The collapse of their internal structure wasn't just a temporary setback, it was a fundamental shift in their DNA. The choice: do they purge the remaining traitors and rebuild from the ashes? The threat, or was Michael Davey the load-bearing wall holding the entire structure together? The final chapter, or a new beginning? Michael's death was the end of his personal story, but it was the catalyst for a much more complex, much more violent chapter for the club he once called home. The Rebels MC as we knew them, the unified, untouchable kings of the road, died that night in 2016 alongside their prince. What remains today is a fractured organization fighting for air in an increasingly crowded underworld. The survival of the club is no longer guaranteed. They are an empire in the middle of a slow-motion collapse, proving that the most dangerous enemy is never the one you see in your rearview mirror, it's the one sitting right behind you on the ride. The prince is buried, the killers are caged, but the streets are still whispering. Some say the internal purge didn't end with Palmer and Rumble. Who is the next name on the list, and will the Rebels survive the next time a brother decides to take the throne? In the vacuum left by the Prince of Penrith, the map of Australia's underworld didn't just change, it bled. When Michael Davey was executed, the wall he had helped maintain around the Rebels' interests crumbled, inviting a level of chaos the streets of Sydney hadn't seen in decades. Here is how the empire fell apart, and the new, more violent players that rose to take its place. The Territory War, a continent up for grabs. For years, the Rebels MC was the largest outlaw motorcycle club in Australia, boasting the most chapters and the most patches on the ground. But power is a target. Following the 2016 hit and the 2018 arrests, the club's internal paranoia made them slow to react to outside threats. Rival gangs didn't just challenge the Rebels, they cannibalized them. The Comancheros, longtime rivals, they used the Rebels' internal instability to aggressively recruit disenchanted Rebels members, effectively taking over key drug distribution hubs in Western Sydney. The Mongols, capitalizing on the Stitch and Plumber betrayal, the Mongols expanded their reach into territory the Rebels had held for 30 years. The Hells Angels. While the rebels were distracted by court dates and internal purges, the Angels solidified their grip on international supply lines, cutting the rebels out of the big end of the business. The rise of the new generation. Perhaps the most chilling consequence of Michael Davey's death was the shift in who was running the streets. The old-school bikie code, which, despite its violence, followed certain unspoken rules, was replaced by a new generation of gangsters. These weren't just guys on bikes. These were Nike bikies, younger, more volatile, and less concerned with club traditions or loyalty to a single patch. They saw Michael's death not as a tragedy, but as a blueprint. If you want the top spot, you don't earn it, you execute for it. The evidence that broke the brotherhood. You might wonder, if the wall of silence was so thick, how did Strike Force Glenn Orey finally get the convictions? The trial of Jason Palmer and David Rumble revealed that the killers made one fatal mistake. They assumed the bikie code would protect them forever. However, the police used a combination of covert surveillance and financial forensics. The digital breadcrumbs. Investigators tracked encrypted communications that didn't just discuss the hit, but revealed the power struggle leading up to it. The financial motive. By following the money, police proved that Michael's influence over the club's treasury was the real reason he had to go. It wasn't about a bike, it was about millions of dollars in illicit revenue. The turncoats. In the end, the unbreakable silence was broken. Fear of life in prison outweighed the fear of the club. Several protected witnesses provided the testimony that finally put the puzzle together. The final verdict. Was it worth it? Today, the Rebels MC still exists, but they are a shadow of the organization the Prince of Penrith once led. The execution of Michael Davey was intended to stabilize the club by removing a liability, but it achieved the exact opposite. It proved that the greatest threat to an outlaw isn't the police, it's the man riding in the lane next to him. Michael Davey's story remains the ultimate cautionary tale for the Australian underworld. He rose to the top, earned the crown, and was ultimately killed by the very weight of it. The execution of Michael Davey didn't just end a life, it changed the DNA of Australian crime. As the rebels bled from the inside, a new, more chaotic era of street warfare exploded across Sydney. Here is the breakdown of the Nike bikie revolution and the legal hammer that came down to stop it. The evolution, from old school to Nike bikies. Before 2016, the rebels followed a strict, almost paramilitary structure. There were meetings, church sessions, and a clear chain of command. But the betrayal of Michael Davey by his own brothers signaled to the younger generation that the old rules were dead. Enter the Nike bikies. This new breed of gangster swapped leather vests and heavy cruisers for designer tracksuits, gold chains, and high-performance cars. They didn't care about riding or club heritage. To them, the Rebels patch was just a brand, a franchise to be used for profit. These groups were more volatile. They used social media to taunt rivals, leading to public shootings in broad daylight. Less loyal, they would patch over, switch gangs, overnight if a better deal was on the table. Highly mobile, without the burden of massive clubhouses, they operated out of rental properties and encrypted apps, making them ghosts to Strike Force detectives. The legislative sledgehammer, Operation Ironside, and the Vlad laws. The government couldn't sit back while the streets of Western Sydney turned into a shooting gallery. The murder of the Prince of Penrith was the catalyst for some of the toughest anti-gang laws in the world. To combat the chaos, authorities introduced the Serious Crime Control Acts and expanded consorting laws. This meant anti-association. It became a crime for convicted offenders to simply speak to one another in public. The end of the clubhouse. Police were given the power to tear down fortified clubhouses, removing the physical hubs, where gangs like the Rebels planned their operations. Operation Ironside. Years after Davey's death, police globally launched a trap using the N0M encrypted app. Because the Rebels were so fractured and paranoid after the Davey hit, many members flocked to this secure app, unaware that the FBI and Australian Federal Police were reading every single message. The new map of Sydney. With the rebels in a state of permanent reconstruction, the power map of Sydney was redrawn. Groups like the Alameddin and Hams family networks began to dominate the headlines, often absorbing former bikie enforcers into their ranks. The traditional bikie war had evolved into a family network war, where the stakes were higher and the bloodlines deeper. The rebels are still there, but they are no longer the undisputed kings. They are survivors in a world that has become much more crowded and much more lethal. The final mystery: was Michael the last of his kind? In many ways, Michael Davey was the last of the traditional princes. He believed in the hierarchy. He believed his status protected him. His death proved that in the modern underworld, status is a bullseye. Today, the driveway in Kingswood where Michael fell is quiet. But the ripple effect of those gunshots can still be felt in every police raid, every new gang law, and every Nike bikie who decides that the crown is worth the cost of betrayal. The prince is gone, but the war he left behind has no end in sight. The fallout of Michael Davey's death didn't just end with a trial. It set the stage for the single greatest law enforcement sting in history. This is the story of how the paranoia following the Prince of Penrith's execution led the rebels straight into a digital trap. The digital Judas, Operation Ironside. After the arrests of Palmer and Rumble, the rebels were terrified. They knew their fortress of silence had cracks. They knew the police were listening. They stopped using burner phones and started looking for a black communication network, something the cops couldn't touch. Enter N0M. It was marketed as the ultimate encrypted device for the underworld. No GPS, no camera, no mic, just a specialized app for high-level business. The rebels bought in by the hundreds. What they didn't know was that N0M was run by the FBI and the Australian Federal Police. Because of the vacuum left by Michael Davey and the subsequent internal wars, the rebels used N0M to reorganize. They discussed hits, drug shipments, and internal purges, thinking they were invisible. In reality, every message was being live-streamed to a police monitoring station. In 2021, the trap snapped shut, leading to the arrest of hundreds of members across the country. The club wasn't just fractured anymore, it was decapitated. Where are they now? The killers behind bars. While the club they once led was being dismantled by the feds, the men who took Michael Davey's life were adjusting to a very different reality. Jason Plummer Palmer, the man who was once a high-ranking heavy, is now a permanent resident of the New South Wales correctional system. During the trial, the court heard how Palmer's involvement wasn't just about a dispute, it was a cold-blooded removal of a man he saw as an obstacle to his own power. He was sentenced to a lengthy term, with the judge noting the calculated and execution-style nature of the murder. David Stitch Rumble. Rumble, the man who once rode shoulder to shoulder with the prince, was also handed a heavy sentence for his role in the conspiracy and execution. The Stitch nickname took on a bitter irony during the investigation, as the very code of brotherhood he claimed to represent was the thing he used to lure Michael to his death. The legacy of the prince. Today, the rebels' MC is a ghost of the empire Michael Davey once helped rule. The Prince of Penrith remains a legend in the Western Sydney streets, a symbol of the height of bikie power and the absolute depth of its treachery. His story is taught to new detectives as the perfect example of the internal implosion. It proves that in the world of organized crime, the biggest threat isn't the police or the rival gangs, it's the ambition of the person standing right next to you. The driveway in Kingswood is just a piece of pavement now. The roar of the rebels' Harleys is quieter than it used to be. But the story of the prince, the plumber, and the Stitch serves as a permanent warning to anyone who thinks loyalty in the underworld is written in anything but disappearing ink. Michael Davey didn't just join the rebels. He became the Prince of Penrith. In the hierarchy of outlaw motorcycle clubs, OMCGs, Penrith was more than a suburb, it was a stronghold. The Enforcer era, Michael began as the Muscle. He was known for a no-nonsense approach to debt collection and territory disputes. His reputation for violence was so absolute that, for years, his presence alone could settle a conflict before a single punch was thrown. The architect of influence, unlike many bikies who were just riders, Davey understood the business. He helped bridge the gap between the rough street-level operations and the high-level organized crime networks that controlled the flow of illicit goods into Sydney's west. The vulnerability, his greatest strength, his absolute control over Penrith, became his greatest weakness. He became too big to ignore. In the eyes of ambitious men like Plummer, Palmer, Michael wasn't just a leader, he was a bottleneck. From a distance, the Hells Angels seems so cool, and it's easy for many to be enticed into wanting to join. However, joining this club isn't for the faint-hearted. Since many do not make the cut, becoming a full member of the Hells Angels can take a really long time, sometimes spanning years. To become a member of the Hells Angels, candidates are first expected to be true motorcycle enthusiasts. They must also own a valid driver's license and a motorcycle of over 750 cubic centimeters, as the average member is expected to ride at least 20,000 kilometers a year in strict formation. Candidates are also required to drive US-built motorcycles, with Harley-Davidson, Indian, and Victory being the most common brands. Prospective members who have applied to be law enforcement officers, such as prison guards or police, are excluded from the club. Child molesters are also not allowed. The initiation process starts with the candidate passing the above criteria. Once that is out of the way, the candidate, now considered a prospective member, enters the stage of being deemed a hang-around. As a hang-around, prospective members are invited to meet older club members at some club meetings, and this stage could last for a long time. If the hang-around still shows interest at this stage, they are then deemed an associate. They remain classified this way for a year or two. After these years pass, an associate is reclassified as a prospect and is now allowed to fully participate in some of the club's activities. However, they do not have voting privileges since the initiation process is still underway. If the prospect proves they have what it takes, they are then upgraded to full membership or full patch, which is the last phase of the initiation process. The full patch refers to the club's four-piece insignia given to its members. This includes the Death Head logo, 2 rockers, a top rocker with the words Hells Angels, and a bottom rocker showing the country, state, or charter location. Rectangular MC patch beneath the wings of the Death Head signifies Motorcycle Club. Prospects are only allowed to wear the bottom rocker along with the MC patch. The final stage of becoming a full member begins with the voting process. A prospect can only become a full member or full patch when they are unanimously voted in by all full members of the club. Hence, a prospect is often required to travel across chapters in their country and introduce themselves to other members. Voting becomes easier once these members have gotten to know the prospect and have vetted them. The prospect must receive 100% of the votes, as a single vote against them means the prospecting stage continues until they are fully voted in. Once they have been voted in, prospects are required to reaffirm their loyalty to the club, and the Hells Angels rocker is finally awarded to them as the final part of the initiation ceremony. At this stage, known as being patched, prospects become full members. Full members of the Hells Angels are recognized by their infamous insignia, the full patch, but this remains the property of the club, not the member, even after the initiation process. The club's official colors are red lettering on a white background, leading to the nickname, the Red and White. Members wear their patches on leather or denim jackets and vests. Some members wear an AFFA patch, meaning Angels Forever, Forever Angels, indicating lifelong membership. Another patch consists of 2 Nazi-style SS lightning bolts beneath the words Filthy Few, worn by select members. According to the club, this patch is a type of merit badge awarded to members who are first to arrive at and last to leave a party. However, some law enforcement officers allege that this patch is worn by members who have committed or are willing to commit murder on behalf of the club. In some cases, members may wear patches that signify their rank within the organization. These small, rectangular patches display the titles of the members in red letters on a white background. Common titles include President, Sergeant-at-Arms, Treasurer, Vice President, and more. If a member is ejected from the club or chooses to leave, they are required to return their patches to the club. Members are expected to pay dues that finance burials and motorcycle runs. Attendance at club meetings and motorcycle runs is also mandatory. Contrary to popular belief, Most Hells Angels members are not drug addicts. The club prohibits intravenous drug use, and many members are known to be fitness enthusiasts. According to Jay Dobbins, an investigative agent who went undercover and infiltrated the Hells Angels from 2001 to 2003, the club has strict rules concerning interactions with women. Wives or girlfriends of members are strictly off-limits, and violations of this rule are met with severe, often violent, consequences. Dobbins also mentioned that members are not allowed to speak to one another while wearing sunglasses. Additionally, members must remove their riding gloves before shaking hands. Prospects are forbidden from patting a member's back or touching the Hells Angels patch, with severe consequences for breaking this rule. Those who leave the club on bad terms have all possessions related to the club taken away from them, including the removal of tattoos that indicate club affiliation. Prospects, along with members' girlfriends and wives, are allowed to wear the number 81, which stands for Support 81, with 8 representing H and 1 representing. The Hells Angels do not have an overall president. Instead, the club is governed by regional officers representing localized chapters at monthly meetings. These chapters have a degree of autonomy regarding minor policy changes and member discipline. Rankings in the club's organization include president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, sergeant-at-arms, and road captain, each carrying out significant duties. Responsibilities within their chapters vary, and regional officers are divided into 2 groups. The first group comprises those who attend the West Coast Officers Meeting, also known as WESCOM. The Westcom group is charged with conducting the policy actions and affairs of the Hells Angels chapters in the western United States. The second group includes those who attend the East Coast Officers Meeting, or ECOM, which governs the chapters in the eastern United States. Although the Hells Angels' founding location was in San Bernardino, California, its unofficial founding location eventually moved to Oakland, California, under the leadership of Sonny Barger, who succeeded Otto Friedli as the de facto national president. This shift made the Oakland chapter one of the most prominent and regarded as first among equals, due to Barger's reputation. The Oakland chapter has the largest membership of any chapter in the United States and is responsible for major decision-making within the club. Any other motorcycle club wishing to be affiliated with the Hells Angels must first apply to the Oakland chapter for membership and be monitored and approved by them before being granted membership. The Hells Angels' traditional motto is "Angels Forever, Forever Angels." They also have other slogans such as, "When we do right, nobody remembers. When we do wrong, nobody forgets. 3 can keep a secret if 2 are dead, and when in doubt, knock them out." The latter coined by New York City chapter member Vincent "Big Vinny" Girolamo. Joining the Hells Angels is far from easy. Prospective members often spend years on a wait list and devote their remaining years as full members to the club. The Hells Angels are not a casual, recreational group. For many members, joining is one of the best experiences of their lives, but leaving the club is a different matter altogether. Members can only leave if they are expelled, as there is no concept of retirement, except in rare cases where certain members are allowed to depart. Still, some have taken the daring step to leave. One notable example is George Christie. "I felt we became the people we rebelled against, and that's exactly what I told them at the meeting when I left," Christie said. "At one time, we would interact with all the clubs up and down the coast, and by 2011 we were fighting every major outlaw bike club in the United States, plus law enforcement. That's where some people lost perspective of what the initial intent was of the whole outlaw lifestyle. It seemed more military, like an army fighting another army." Christie was a Hells Angels leader for 35 years out of a 40-year membership. He was drawn to the outlaw biker lifestyle as a kid in the mid-1950s when he first saw a long-haired, denim-jacketed biker riding through the streets without a care in the world. Christie described that moment as life-changing. What truly fueled his interest, however, was an incident during high school when his principal accused him of cheating because he scored highly on an IQ test. Christie, who did poorly in school, thought, "If this is a polite society, no thank you," as he left the principal's office. After high school, Christie joined the Marine Corps. When he was discharged, he bought a motorcycle and started hanging out with other biker groups, such as the Satan's Slaves and Question Marks, though his ultimate dream was to join the Hells Angels. By 1976, Christie had become a full-patch member, and soon after, he rose in rank, founding the Ventura, California chapter in 1978 and even carrying the Olympic torch during the 1984 Los Angeles Games. Despite being a high-ranking member, Christie also worked for the Department of Defense. In 1978, his co-workers discovered he was a Hells Angels leader, a fact that came to light during a brutal conflict with a rival group involving fights, shootings, and bombings, which led to his resignation. Trouble followed Christie. He was later charged with orchestrating a murder-for-hire plot involving a leader of the Mexican Mafia prison gang. While in prison, Christie learned that rival clubs did not fight each other behind bars, which motivated him to push for peace on the streets. By the time he was acquitted in 1987, Christie had already started negotiating peace between rival motorcycle clubs. His efforts seemed successful until the 2002 Laughlin River Run, an annual motorcycle rally in Nevada, where a brawl between the Mongols and Hells Angels left 3 people dead. By 2011, the Hells Angels were embroiled in conflicts with nearly every major outlaw motorcycle club and law enforcement. Christie wanted the wars to end, but others did not share his vision. I felt that groups were fracturing off, doing their own thing, if you will. It was tough, he said. I decided that if I stayed in the club, it would strictly be ego-driven. I didn't want to be the guy who used to be a Hells Angels leader. In 2011, Christie made his decision to leave. He walked into a club meeting, announced his departure, removed his patches, and laid them on the table. His final words to his former club members were, "We have become the people that we rebelled against. And I'm gone." While Christie argued that he followed protocols and formally quit the club, it appeared that attempting to leave was a mistake. He was soon accused of being an informant, and his status was changed to out bad, meaning he was no longer in good standing with the Hells Angels and could not have any relations or contact with other members. In essence, he had been excommunicated from the club. Christie claimed he was shamed on social media and faced accusations from people, including strangers. The sense of kinship and community that had initially spurred Christie to join the outlaw biker lifestyle was stripped from him simply because he chose to leave. In an interview, Christie was asked why being out bad still seemed to bother him. His response was, "Being out bad with no contact in the outlaw motorcycle world is like a stigma. They don't want people interacting with you. They don't want people talking to you. Club members who I was friendly with after I left had their memberships in jeopardy if they communicated with me." He continued, "When I left, it kind of reminded me of a divorce. At first, everyone wanted to be amiable. They weren't happy about my decision, but they understood it. As things progressed, it became aggressive, and it was hard to take. The phone rings, and you pick up, and it's one of your former brothers telling you you're no longer a friend to us. That's my whole life because I didn't have many friends outside the club. It was a hard pill to swallow." George Christie wasn't the only one to suffer this tragic fate after leaving the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. "My name is Jay Dobbins. I'm a retired undercover federal agent and I infiltrated the Hells Angels," said Jay Dobbins, who infiltrated the Hells Angels between 2001 and 2003. Dobbins, a former football player and athlete, decided to join the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, ATF, after surviving a critical shooting during an operation in 1987. By 2002, when the war between the Hells Angels and the Mongols was at its peak, federal law enforcement launched an undercover operation called Operation Black Biscuit. Dobbins, posing as a gun runner and debt collector, went by the name Jay Davis, and was known to gang members as Jaybird. Dobbins staged a fake murder to gain the Hells Angels' trust. A law enforcement officer posed as a Mongols biker, covered in lamb blood and brains, and was laid in a shallow grave for photographs and videos. Dobbins mailed a blood-stained Mongols patch to the Hells Angels, impressing the leadership so much that they immediately voted him as a fully patched member of the Mesa, Arizona charter, although they later denied this. Unfortunately, as Dobbins moved up the ranks, the lifestyle began to strain his family life. "I had an argument with my wife. At one point, I came home after being away for an extended period. I walked in like Jaybird Davises walks into my house, and she's like, "You cannot be gone and come here and treat me and our kids like we're street people." Despite acknowledging that the Hells Angels could be dangerous, Dobbins admitted to respecting some members. After his true identity was revealed in 2004, the Hells Angels felt betrayed and directed their threats at his family. Plans to inject him with HIV, gang rape his wife and daughter, and kidnap and murder his son were uncovered. The ATF downplayed the threats, claiming no one had forced Dobbins to go undercover. Even when an arson attack occurred at his Tucson, Arizona home with his family inside, the Bureau didn't take the threat seriously. Though his family survived, their home and belongings were destroyed. Dobbins filed and won a lawsuit against the ATF in 2014. He later wrote a book, No Angel: My Harrowing Undercover Journey to the Inner Circle of the Hells Angels, which became a New York Times bestseller. The book detailed the Hells Angels' investigation and its impact on his career and life. Despite the tragic events following his departure, Dobbins now runs a company focused on law enforcement training. Finally, there is the case of David LaBrava. Unlike others who faced hardship after leaving the Hells Angels, LaBrava left in good standing. Known for his role as Happy Loman in the FX series Sons of Anarchy, LaBrava was a real-life member of the Hells Angels. Initially hired as a technical advisor for the show in 2008 to ensure accurate depictions of a motorcycle club, he was later given a role and portrayed the hitman Happy Loman. LaBrava stayed with the Hells Angels until 2019, when he announced his departure via an Instagram post. "I want to say I am no longer a member of the largest motorcycle club in the world, the Hells Angels MC. The only club I'm a member of now is the human race," he wrote. He added that it was his own decision to leave and that he was no longer a patch holder, considering himself a civilian. Unlike others, LaBrava's exit was amicable, and he has had no negative experiences with the club since. Non-bikers might not understand the allure of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, but motorcycle enthusiasts are often in awe of the club, eager to join. This respect is linked to the club's storied history. According to the Hells Angels official website, the first club was founded on March 17, 1948, in Fontana, San Bernardino, California. Before then, various motorcycle clubs existed independently. Otto Friedli, a World War II veteran, was credited with founding the club after breaking away from the Pissed Off Bastards Motorcycle Club due to a feud with a rival gang. Another theory suggests that the Hells Angels was founded on November 15, 1951, by Dick White in San Bernardino. White was said to be a member of the Redlands Road Runners. The club attributes its name to Arvid Olsen, an acquaintance of the founders who served in the Hells Angel Squadron of the Flying Tigers during World War II. The club's official colors, red and white, and its charter, allegedly drawn up in 1950, reflect this heritage. Chapters began to emerge across California, operating independently. The San Francisco chapter formed in 1954, followed by North Sacramento in 1956. Sonny Barger took over leadership from Friedli and created the Oakland chapter in 1957, uniting the chapters under common bylaws. The Hells Angels expanded beyond California, opening an international chapter in New Zealand in 1961. On July 30, 1969, two London chapters were formed, and by 1973, they merged into the London Charter. Canada followed in 1977 with a chapter in Montreal, expanding to other parts of Quebec. However, the Hells Angels didn't quite succeed in taking over the Quebec biking scene without interference, as there was a violent turf war that left over 160 dead, 300 injured, and over 100 bikers incarcerated. By the end of the 70s, the club already had charters in Australia, and in 1984, Rio de Janeiro had its chapter, making it the first South American country with a HAMC charter. By 1993, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club had spread across continents and was launched in Johannesburg, South Africa. Turkey became the first Muslim country to have a Hells Angels chapter in 2009. Now, the club has a membership of over 6,467 chapters across 59 countries, making it the largest motorcycle club in the world. However, there was still a veil of mystery over the club, as many from the outside weren't quite sure what went on within. Sometimes, the Hells Angels are depicted as free-spirited men bound by brotherhood and loyalty. On the other hand, they are also depicted as a violent criminal gang, and the murder of an 18-year-old concertgoer by one of their members didn't help this reputation. Hells Angels members were essentially known as drug addicts and barroom fighters. However, law enforcement and intelligence agencies like the United States Department of Justice, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Criminal Intelligence Service Canada, and even Europol all considered the Hells Angels an organized crime syndicate. Although the Hells Angels claim not to be a racially segregated club, members are often white men. According to Sonny Barger in a 2000 BBC interview, the club as a whole is not racist, but we probably have enough racist members that no black guy is going to get in it. He also said, if you're a motorcycle rider and you're white, you want to join the Hells Angels. If you're black, you want to join the East Bay Dragons. That's how it is, whether anyone likes it or not. We don't have no blacks, and they don't have no whites. While Barger claims the Hells Angels weren't racist, a 1983 incident proved otherwise. The Satan's Angels Motorcycle Club in Vancouver had a black member before it decided to merge with the Hells Angels in 1983. However, the San Francisco and Anchorage chapters threatened to expel the Vancouver chapter when they learned there was a black member. The issue was only resolved when the man decided to change his nationality to Hawaiian. In another case, a chapter in Windsor, England, was only granted official status in 1985 after its only black member had died in police custody. In their support, an African-American biker group known as the Chosen Few Motorcycle Club stated in a 1996 Ebony article that they didn't perceive any racial animosity from members of the Hells Angels. They also said they allowed members of the Hells Angels into their territory, where everyone parties and gets together. The Hells Angels echoed this, stating, "We don't have any Negro members," but maintained that it was because no black individuals had sought membership. It is unclear why many people joined the Hells Angels, but one common factor seems to be a sense of community. In the case of former leader George Christie, he had been drawn by the free-spiritedness of the members and wanted to be part of this close-knit community of bikers. Undercover agent Jay Dobbins also hinted at this as one of the reasons why he respected members of the club. In a law enforcement conference in El Paso, Dobbins said that the Hells Angels, even with their fearsome reputations, offered members a sense of belonging in society. "You can be, in essence, an unimportant, unknown person," Dobbins said. "When you join one of those gangs and they put that patch on your back, all of a sudden people are paying attention to you. People are buying you drinks, people are giving you drugs, women want to put their arm around your shoulder, you're intimidating, you scare people, and to some people, that's intoxicating," he said. Therefore, it is little wonder why George Christie appeared slightly hurt by this loss of community when he was declared out bad by the club. Another thing that stands out about the Hells Angels is how seriously they expect loyalty from members. Christie appeared to have betrayed the club by leaving, and they made sure he paid for this by not only isolating him from the community but also ensuring the general public saw him in a negative light. He even went on to serve prison time for crimes he had committed earlier, 3 years after he left the Hells Angels. The same thing played out with Dobbins when he was revealed to be an undercover agent. The threats were just a way for the club to show their disappointment at the betrayal. Despite these acts unveiling the dark side of the Hells Angels, they maintain that they are not a criminal or violent organization. Members of the club continue to assert that they are only a group of motorcycle enthusiasts from all over the world who want to ride motorcycles together and organize social events. They insist that crimes committed by any member of the Hells Angels are the sole responsibility of the parties involved and not the club as a whole. Even though the Hells Angels insist on being a social group, there are several instances that have shown the violent nature of the club. First is the tragic case of Meredith Curly Hunter Jr., the 18-year-old American who was stabbed to death by a member of the Hells Angels at the 1969 Altamont Free Concert. What makes the death of Meredith Hunter most unfortunate was that the incident was caught on camera and became a central scene in the documentary Gimme Shelter by the Maysles brothers. 18-year-old Hunter was a bubbly teen from Berkeley, California, known for his flashy dress and hard-to-miss afro. In 1969, he attended the infamous Altamont Free Concert with his white, blonde girlfriend, a friend, and his girlfriend, traveling from Berkeley to the event. His sister, Dixie, had warned him not to attend, as racism was still prevalent in the outer reaches of Alameda County. However, Hunter shrugged it off but armed himself with a .22 Smith & Wesson revolver just in case he needed protection. It's important to note that the unfortunate incident at the Altamont Free concert could have been avoided had the event been well planned. There were hundreds of thousands of people at the venue, and the stage was set so low that the crowd pressed in, making the stage look small and uncomfortable. Members of the Hells Angels present at the concert saw this and took advantage of the situation, offering to prevent artists from being approached by overzealous fans who attempted to get on the stage. All they needed in exchange for this service was $500 worth of beer. They parked their motorcycles in front of the stage and ensured no one tried to get close. By the time the Rolling Stones mounted the stage later that night, the crowd had become restless and was pressing on the stage. The Hells Angels, already drunk, began throwing their empty beer cans at the restless crowd, which further increased the tension in the air. The lead singer, Mick Jagger, had to pause and speak to the crowd, urging them to calm down and stop pushing. "I can't do any more than just ask you, beg you," he said. "Just to keep it together, you can do it. It's within your power. Everyone, Hells Angels, everybody, let's just keep ourselves together." Still, the crowd pressed on, and Hunter, with his bright lime green suit, could be spotted in the crowd. After a few minutes of calm, the band started performing again. This time, Hunter climbed up a speaker box next to the stage. He then got into a scuffle with the Hells Angels on guard and was chased back into the crowd, where 4 other angels descended on him. After a few minutes, Hunter, who had been high on drugs, angrily returned to the front of the stage. He was so furious that his girlfriend, Patty Bredhoft, tearfully begged him to move farther back into the crowd with her. From the footage captured, Hunter was seen suddenly lunging at someone in the crowd, drawing what appeared to be a revolver, and pointing it in the air. Then, a man wearing a Hells Angels uniform is seen rushing at the teenager with his hand raised, holding what was later identified as a knife. The Hells Angels member, identified as Alan Passaro, proceeded to stab Hunter twice. By the time Hunter's body was recovered, he had been stabbed 5 times in the upper back and was stomped upon by other Hells Angels members. The footage then cuts to Hunter's girlfriend crying at the sight of her boyfriend's body being wrapped up by medical examiners at the scene. In total, 4 people died at the concert, 2 by a hit-and-run car accident and 1 by an LSD-induced drowning in an irrigation canal. The stabbing of Meredith Hunter gave the Hells Angels a bad reputation as a violent group, and this was worsened after Alan Passaro, the member who had stabbed Hunter, was acquitted of the crime on grounds of self-defense. This was just one of the many instances where the Hells Angels proved to be deadly. J. Dobbins, in an interview, also talked about how a woman had been murdered by the Hells Angels in Mesa, Arizona. The Hells Angels in Mesa had murdered a woman, an innocent woman. They was in their clubhouse, right? Yeah, they basically recruited her off the street to come to a party. The party got out of hand. She mouthed off in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Man, you don't talk on these dudes in their clubhouse, and you don't insult them." He then narrated what the club did to her. She took a beating in the Mesa clubhouse. They beat her down and then they stuffed her in the trunk of a car and drove her from Mesa out to Apache Junction, Arizona, which is further east, and cut her head off. These notable events showed how brutal the Hells Angels could be when faced with what was perceived to be disrespect or even betrayal. No matter how they tried to assert their innocence, the Hells Angels have created a bad reputation among law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Their members are constantly caught up in robberies, extortion, drug dealing, murder, gun running, and even prostitution operations. The truth is, you never can know what goes on behind the scenes of this motorcycle club unless you join, and clearly, becoming a member comes with a heavy price. Unless you are bold enough, the tragic fate of leaving the Hells Angels can be greatly terrifying, and if you are not careful, it can cost all that you hold dearly. When a prospect becomes a full-fledged member, they get a vest with the famous logo and name on the back. If one of the bikers gets arrested, he'll hand his vest to a fellow member to avoid tainting it in jail. If they get hurt and need an emergency procedure, they'll do whatever possible to prevent the vest from being cut or torn off. They have a dress code, The guidelines on this one vary a bit from chapter to chapter. Some are not even allowed to wear shorts, no matter how hot it gets. The most common are charters who wear all black. Some allow blue jeans and camouflage patterns. The color and design codes can help distinguish which charter they belong to. There's an order that they ride in. The road captain and charter president remain at the front of the group. From there, the bikers align based on seniority and rank. The older members will stay closer to the front, followed by newer members and ending with prospects in the back. They all pull over together. If one of them gets pulled over by a cop, they all stop, a bit intimidating for the cop, I'm sure. It signifies how the brotherhood is linked like family. If you mess with one Hell's Angel, you mess with them all. They can't work for a prison. Given the Hell's Angels' history with law enforcement, they aren't allowed to work for a prison while in the group. Members also cannot be police officers due to the conflict of interest. The group stands for freedom in the sense that they run by their own rules, so prison guards and law enforcement officers are out of the question. You can't share information about fellow members. If a member were to rat out a fellow brother, they could expect to get kicked out of the group. The Hell's Angels website clearly states, "We do not answer questions about members, not even missing ones. Once a Hell's Angel, always a Hell's Angel. Once you're an official Hell's Angel, there's no backing out. Members don't retire, and the only time they exit the group is if they're kicked out for breaking a rule. Your charter essentially becomes a second family. When one of them passes away, everyone unites to honor the memory of their fallen brother. No talking to the media. Since the Hell's Angels are very secretive in their activities, none of them are allowed to talk to the media. Harleys only. To be a Hell's Angel, you must own a Harley Davidson. Riding only Harleys is a Hell's Angels tradition that runs along the same lines as the sacred vest. It holds value because it's a part of what makes them who they are. They ride thousands of miles a year together. According to their website, the Hell's Angels ride around 12,000 miles together every year. While Hell's Angels are like brothers, their connection is founded on their shared love of motorcycles. They'll happily spend hours on the road. Show up to club events. Members who fail to show up to meetings and hangouts indicate to others that they are missing the point of the club. The Biker Brotherhood is known for having a strict attendance code. Those who continually miss events are seen as disrespectful and are not likely to make it past the hanging around phase of recruitment. It's a brotherhood, not a sisterhood. Hell's Angels refers to itself as a brotherhood. Thus, you'll only see men with the death head insignias on their back. Though women aren't technically in the club, they do play a major role in it. Many of the Hell's Angels have wives and families. If he's going to be a part of the crew, then his partner has to understand the commitment and be okay with the lifestyle and all that comes with it. In total, 4 people died at the concert, 2 by a hit-and-run car accident and 1 by an LSD-induced drowning in an irrigation canal. The stabbing of Meredith Hunter gave the Hell's Angels a bad reputation as a violent group, and this was worsened after Alan Passaro, the member who had stabbed Hunter, was acquitted of the crime on grounds of self-defense. This was just one of the many instances where the Hell's Angels proved to be deadly. J. Dobbins, in an interview, also talked about how a woman had been murdered by the Hell's Angels in Mesa, Arizona. The Hell's Angels in Mesa had murdered a woman, an innocent woman. They was in their clubhouse, right? Yeah, they basically recruited her off the street to come to a party. The party got out of hand. She mouthed off in the wrong place at the wrong time. Man, you don't talk on these dudes in their clubhouse, and you don't insult them. He then narrated what the club did to her. She took a beating in the Mesa clubhouse. They beat her down and then they stuffed her in the trunk of a car and drove her from Mesa out to Apache Junction, Arizona, which is further east, and cut her head off. These notable events showed how brutal the Hell's Angels could be when faced with what was perceived to be disrespect or even betrayal. No matter how they tried to assert their innocence, the Hell's Angels have created a bad reputation among law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Their members are constantly caught up in robberies, extortion, drug dealing, murder, gun running, and even prostitution operations. The truth is, you never can know what goes on behind the scenes of this motorcycle club unless you join, and clearly, becoming a member comes with a heavy price. Unless you are bold enough, the tragic fate of leaving the Hells Angels can be greatly terrifying, and if you are not careful, it can cost all that you hold dearly. When a prospect becomes a full-fledged member, they get a vest with the famous logo and name on the back. If one of the bikers gets arrested, he'll hand his vest to a fellow member to avoid tainting it in jail. If they get hurt and need an emergency procedure, they'll do whatever possible to prevent the vest from being cut or torn off. They have a dress code. The guidelines on this one vary a bit from chapter to chapter. Some are not even allowed to wear shorts, no matter how hot it gets. The most common are charters who wear all black. Some allow blue jeans and camouflage patterns. The color and design codes can help distinguish which charter they belong to. There's an order that they ride in. The road captain and charter president remain at the front of the group. From there, the bikers align based on seniority and rank. The older members will stay closer to the front, followed by newer members and ending with prospects in the back. They all pull over together. If one of them gets pulled over by a cop, they all stop. A bit intimidating for the cop, I'm sure. It signifies how the brotherhood is linked like family. If you mess with one Hells Angel, you mess with them all. They can't work for a prison. Given the Hells Angels' history with law enforcement, they aren't allowed to work for a prison while in the group. Members also cannot be police officers due to the conflict of interest. The group stands for freedom in the sense that they run by their own rules, so prison guards and law enforcement officers are out of the question. You can't share information about fellow members. If a member were to rat out a fellow brother, they could expect to get kicked out of the group. The Hells Angels website clearly states, "We do not answer questions about members, not even missing ones. Once a Hells Angel, always a Hells Angel. Once you're an official Hells Angel, there's no backing out. Members don't retire, and the only time they exit the group is if they're kicked out for breaking a rule. Your charter essentially becomes a second family. When one of them passes away, everyone unites to honor the memory of their fallen brother. No talking to the media. Since the Hells Angels are very secretive in their activities, none of them are allowed to talk to the media. Harleys only. To be a Hells Angel, you must own a Harley Davidson. Riding only Harleys is a Hells Angels tradition that runs along the same lines as the sacred vest. It holds value because it's a part of what makes them who they are. They ride thousands of miles a year together. According to their website, the Hells Angels ride around 12,000 miles together every year. While Hells Angels are like brothers, their connection is founded on their shared love of motorcycles. They'll happily spend hours on the road. Show up to club events. Members who fail to show up to meetings and hangouts indicate to others that they are missing the point of the club. The Biker Brotherhood is known for having a strict attendance code. Those who continually miss events are seen as disrespectful and are not likely to make it past the hanging around phase of recruitment. It's a brotherhood, not a sisterhood. Hells Angels refers to itself as a brotherhood. Thus, you'll only see men with the death head insignias on their back. Though women aren't technically in the club, they do play a major role in it. Many of the Hells Angels have wives and families. If he's going to be a part of the crew, then his partner has to understand the commitment and be okay with the lifestyle and all that comes with it.